welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our special event today. My name is Ellysa Cahoy, and I'm very proud to serve as an Assistant Director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge some of the contributions of some of the very significant people in this room, although all of you are important, and we love all of you. First and foremost, we would like to thank Dean Barbara Dewey, who is right here. Could you stand, Dean Dewey, for sponsoring the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and for her support of this award in particular. Thank you, Dean Dewey. And I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until the end of this paragraph for everybody else. Thank you to our Associate Dean, Ann Langley, if she could stand, for her support and guidance as well. And we'd also like to thank our Associate Dean, Karen Eklund, who's also in attendance today. We're glad she's here too. We want to say thank you to Jill Shockey. Please stand, Jill Shockey and Wilson Hutton, for their public relations and design assistance. We want to say a big thank you to the faculty and staff of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, including the person who makes it all happen, our outreach coordinator, right over there in the corner, Caroline Wermuth. Thank you so much. We want to say thank you to our Lynd Ward Prize Advisory Board members who guide and steward this award from year to year. And you can just stand briefly as I say your name. Wilson Hutton, Harlan Ritchie, Scott Smith, Sandy Stelz, and the director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, Stephen Hurd. We also want to recognize the financial contributions of the Special Collections Library and the English Department towards the continuation of this award, and thanks to Sandy Stelz and Scott Smith, respectively, for making that support happen. And so now, let's give a round of applause. We would also like to recognize Robin Ward Savage and Nanda Whedon Ward for the donation of the materials of their father, Lynd Ward, to Penn State University. And we are so lucky to have Lynd Ward's daughter, Robin Ward Savage, here with us today. Thank you for being here with us, Robin. The Lynd Ward Prize honors Mr. Ward's significant influence on the development of the graphic novel, and celebrates the gift of an extensive collection of Ward's wood engravings, original book illustrations, and other graphic art materials donated by Robin and Nanda. Between 1929 and 1937, Lynd Ward published his 6 groundbreaking wordless novels: God's Man, Madman's Drum, Wild Pilgrimage, Prelude to a Million Years, Song Without Words, and Vertigo, all of which have been reissued by the Library of America in a 2-volume box set, which I have right here, and which has been donated by the Library of America and will be presented as part of the Lynd Ward Prize today. The Lynd Ward Prize was established in part because of Penn State's strong interest in the art of the graphic novel. This is the 5th year of the award, which is presented annually to the best graphic novel, fiction or nonfiction, published in the previous calendar year by a living U.S. or Canadian citizen or resident. And if you have not already, stop by Sidewater Commons after our ceremony, which is just right down that way, off to your left, to see a terrific exhibit on past award and honor books curated by our own Penn State librarian, Glenn Massachuca. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce the co-chair of the 2015 Lynd Ward Prize jury, Joel Priddy, who will present the Honor Book Award for this year, and Dr. Priddy will be followed by his jury co-chair, Brandon Hyde, who will present the Lynd Ward Prize Award for 2015. Thank you.
Okay, so it's 1985. I'm 14 years old. I have a big blonde bowl cut, pimples, everything that an awkward teenager can be. I'm in a B. Dalton's at the Fashion Square Mall in Charlottesville, and I'm having my discovery of rock and roll moment, where the sky rips open and you connect to like minds without ever meeting them, and suddenly you're aware of just how a potential, artistic potential, cultural potential, and it's all because for some, caprice of distribution, this copy of Raw magazine was on the magazine shelf of the B. Daltons. And this magazine, it included works by Art Spiegelman, Chris Ware, a previous Lynd Award awardee, Ben Catcher, all of these great giants of comics and graphic novels. And it also included a 6-page story by Richard McGuire called Here. And of all of the amazing work in this comic, this is the one that lived with me and with many other people. It was only 6 pages long, 32 panels, and one point of view, looking at a corner of a room. But then from this one point of view, shifting through time, inserting panels to have time upon time layer on top of itself. And this comic has been, well, it changed everyone's thinking on how time works. You couldn't have a conversation about time in comics without bringing up Here. Because, time is very important in comics because it doesn't exist. You don't have time, you have space. And so you have to divide, subdivide, and organize space to create sort of a collaborative illusion of time with the reader. And to continue with the rock and roll metaphor, Richard McGuire had just blown the doors off the joint here. He showed us a completely new way of how to map time through a sequence. And by showing us one way, he made it possible for us to start experimenting with all sorts of other ways. Hugely, hugely influential, cast a long shadow over 30 years, and so it was with a little bit of trepidation when I heard that, 3 decades later, he was returning to Here as a graphic novel. It had made a very, very good 6-page story. Did it need to be hundreds of pages as a graphic novel? And pleased to say that yes, it did. He basically, he went past the fascinating formalism, sort of the thought experiment of the first short story, and broadened the scope. He, physically broadened the scope. Instead of having 6 panels on a page, each page was dedicated to a larger view of this one corner. He broadened his approach to the art, combining textured pencil marks with the flat vectors of computer graphics, and of course, color entered into it. But more importantly, he started to really go into the parallels possible by showing multiple points of time united by this point of view. And parallels between people and actions and attitudes. And this made it possible for him to to show you, sort of universal approaches to love and heartbreak and tension and betrayal and all of these things, all within sort of this tight, singular frame of this one location. The jury for the Lynd Award Prize, in selecting this as an honor book, said, making literal the idiom, if the walls could talk, McGuire's Here curates the long history of events transpiring in one location. Though through subtle transposition of the objects and individuals in a room, the book teaches us that space is defined over time. Evoking our longing for place, the book performs this cumulative effect for the reader by layering people, experiences, and events in the context of a single environment. So the 2015 Lynd Award honoree is Richard McGuire's Here. Thank you.
And we're now going to have the presentation of the Lynd Award Prize. Brandon Hyde, co-chair, is going to present that.
Afternoon. Hi. I'm Brandon Hyde, and along with Priddy, I was the co-chair for this year's Lynd Award Prize. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the Pennsylvania Center for the Book for giving me this chance to be a part of this process. This process and this experience would not be complete without the help and support of the rest of the Lynd Award prize jury. They are as follows: Joel Priddy, Veronica Hicks, Brent Book, and Jonathan Abel. Thank you. During our process, we filtered through a lot of comics and graphic novels, but over time we were able to whittle it down to one winner. As you know, that winner of the 2015 Lynd Prize is This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki, published by First Second. In our press release, we talked about This One Summer, and we said, "This One Summer is a beautifully drawn, keenly observed story, full of fluid line, sensitive eye to emblematic moments that convey character, time, and place. The surf at night, the sound of flip-offs, a guarded sigh. All at the meandering pace of a summer's vacation. The Tamakis astutely orchestrate the formal complexities of the graphic novel in the service of an evocative, immersive story. At first blush, a coming-of-age story centered on two young girls. The book belongs equally to all of its cast, any of whom feel realized enough to have supported a narrative in their own right. Striking, relatable, poignant, this graphic novel lingers with readers long after their eyes have left the pages." Now, that's a lot to take in, so let's break this down a little bit and see what this book is about. This is a story about a young girl named Rose and her family. It's a tradition of the family to go to the beach every summer and spend some vacation there. But this year, it feels a little different. It's not the same. Things are changing here, and things are going to something different. This One Summer is a coming-of-age story, but it never feels constrained to those genre trappings that some fiction can fall into. There are moments in this story that feel strikingly familiar, and as if they were plucked from your memory and laid out in front of you. There are other moments that are heart-achingly new, but never out of the realm of reality. You understand how this could happen, how this is part of someone's life. This connection with the story is a testament to the characters within. As we mentioned in our press release, the supporting cast is fully realized. The characters revolving around Rose's story are never background noise or filler. These are fully formed people. Real enough that you could reach out and touch them, you can have a conversation with them. Every expression, every line of dialogue, it builds these characters into individuals for the moment to shine. As one of the jury members mentioned in our deliberations, Wendy is that childhood friend that you spent countless hours with, whittling down the days alongside. This familiarity is not exclusive to just one character. There's the goofy uncle who's a bit too loud sometimes. There's the teenage crush that makes you all wobbly inside. There's even the dad at the dinner table, because he's doing air drums while everyone's trying to eat. I can certainly test that last one is true, but with my dad, it was Led Zeppelin. To gloss over the art would be a disservice to the comic entirely. This One Summer is the sum of its parts, a collaboration that combines word and art with something entirely new that cannot exist on its own. There are moments in this book that will make you sit back for a second, attempting to absorb the entire page, brimming with detail. It's an accomplishment, a visual narrative, that few comics can hope to achieve. Those moments that stop the reader and make them focus on one particular page fits almost too well into a comic regarding the summer vacation. If you asked anyone here, especially the students, if their summer vacation went by slowly, or if they had enough time to do everything they planned to do, I can imagine the answer would be a resounding no from the crowd. And I think that's depicted incredibly well in this comic. The sequences pause at times. They give readers a sense of weightlessness with the characters, a freeing sense of that these days will never end. And in the summer, it never feels as endless at that time. But there's something else that This One Summer accomplishes very well, and especially specifically in terms of that time in your life, when you're transitioning from being considered a child into a teenager. And with that, there are moments that could be used as nostalgic, where you look back and you see it with rose-tinted glasses and not entirely how it actually was. And because of that, I think, and that's why the summer works so well, is because it presents you with an honest and real story that you connect with. There's a deeper bond that forms with the reader because of it. There's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone, when you realize that these moments, these times in your life are something you've experienced. The growing pains that Rose is going through is something that you've had before. Now, this one, Summer, is an accomplishment of a graphic novel. A story that sinks into your brain and it stays there long after you close its pages. It has a life of its own. It will follow you long after you thought you'd been done with it. And in closing, I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming the winner, the 2015 Lynd Award Prize for Graphic Novel of the Year, and our very esteemed guest for tonight, Mariko Tamaki. Thank you.
You come back from being described as poignant. I feel like once you've been described as poignant, and when someone like asks you like take out the garbage or something, you kind of feel like saying like, I'm poignant. I'm just gonna leave that there. So I'm gonna read the speech that I've written for you guys, and then I'm going to sort of give you like a little behind the scenes of how a comic book, what a comic book looks like before it gets to you guys. And I want to say, obviously, that I accept this on behalf of myself and my cousin Jillian Tamaki, who couldn't be here. And I realized as I was writing this speech, it's sort of like, I mean, when you write a speech to accept a prize, you sound sort of like, it sounds pretty boastful, which as a Canadian I'm super uncomfortable with. Obviously, I wanted to write a speech that was about writing comics, but I give you this speech with the knowledge that, obviously, writing comics is pointless unless there's someone to illustrate comics. So if Jillian were here, she would give her own boastful speech, but it's just going to be me. So writing comics. I didn't think about writing comics before I started writing comics, which I think is probably a really good thing, because I think one of the best ways to approach any artistic endeavor is to have aspirations, but not expectations. As an aside, if there are future writers out there, and I imagine if you're here now, that some of you must want to be writers, or you're escaping a psychotic ex-boyfriend or something, I don't know. So Ira Glass has this really great quote where he says that the challenge of being an artist has to do with taste and development of your taste and skill, where your understanding of what is good develops before your ability to create something good. Which means that when you start writing, you're probably going to hate most of what you write, and that is fine. And the trick is to want to write beyond that and to continue writing. So for most of my life as a writer, I tried to focus on the act and never what I thought anything I was doing. I try not to think of what I'm doing could be. I try just to think about the fact that I have to do it. And if you're wondering, creating fake deadlines for yourself totally helps. So I think aside from my dogged insistence on writing, that there are several qualities that I have tried to cultivate over the past decade that have contributed to my comic writing work. And just to be clear, I'm like 39. I feel really comfortable having this level of success at 39. So I feel like, and so when I say a decade, probably more than a decade, it's probably like 20 years. For me, being a writer is kind of like being a spy. And I think that a lot of that has to do with my obsession with Harriet the Spy, which I still think is probably one of the best middle grade books ever written. Also, I think it's helped by my own general sense of unease as part of and when interacting with the world around me. So as a result, I've spent a lifetime eavesdropping on the world around me, which is one of the reasons that I accept these invitations, so that I can just eavesdrop on you guys and listen to how you guys talk, because it's fascinating. Because I love talk. I love what people say and how they say it. So for me, spying is not like a watching, it's really a listening thing, which really makes me an eavesdropper more than a spy. Also because I can't run and jump, that would make me a pretty terrible international spy. I love the things that people say before they, one of my favorite things is the things that people say before they say something bad about someone, like the precursor, the verbal precursor to dissing someone really hard. I really love that. I love when people put on girly voices and accents that they didn't grow up with as a means of communicating things, which everybody does. Louis C.K. does it all the time. That's like half his act. I briefly translated this into a start of a career in academia with a graduate degree in women's studies, studying drag queens, until I realized that there's not much money in that. There's not a ton of money in comics either, to be really clear, but I think it's more fun. You guys might love women's studies and drag queens. Go for it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I think you should. Writers, in addition to being spies, are team players. And I know that this is sometimes hard to believe because really the picture of the artist or the writer is, you're alone in your cottage with your typewriter and your thoughts and your bottle of rum or whatever it is you use. But really and truly, even if you're not writing comics, you're always making a book with someone else. In my case, if it's not an illustrator, it's an editor. I know about teamwork because, not because I've spent any time playing on teams, I know that's a big thing here, but I never did that. But because I spent many years working as a performance artist, which curiously poses being a performance artist, which is really the wackiest job in the art world, as something constructive and useful, which is maybe why I say that. Performance art is, I think, for many people, a lonesome venture, but for me it was a very political and collective one. As a performance artist, with groups which included Pretty Quirky and Pissed Off, which to this day is my favorite performance art group that I was in. I spent a lot of time plotting artistic ventures that were often embarrassing and unconventional with other people who were making it possible to do these things because we were doing them together. Everything is less embarrassing if you're doing it with someone else, which is why I usually wish that Jillian was here next to me. One of these things, just FYI, involved sitting on a frozen birthday cake dressed in leotard. That's on the internet somewhere. You can go find that. Performance art is one of the most apologetic of art forms. It is often untranslatable and has no desire to explain itself. And while I don't think that books should be that way, I think that there is some value in coming at your art with a sense that your first responsibility, your main responsibility, is to your own message and impulse. There's a limit to what you can do in terms of making work that you know is going to someone in the world. Like, if you are making work for an audience, there's going to be less of you in it, I think. And that can be a really hard thing to do, but it's a good thing to try to do. I also grew up as an artist in a collective of feminist creators, and I'm definitely a feminist writer. Feminist creators instilled in me the sense of the importance of telling stories that were personal, on telling stories that were important because they were personal as opposed to, say, heroic. I'm not a big fan of heroic, as you can tell from anything I've written. I grew up as an artist in a community of women who were telling stories about their communities, their struggles, their frustrations, and their passions, and that has been a very good thing to grow up in, I think. So writing comics. Writing comics is many things. In some ways, it's like writing into a void, writing a story that, when you are finished, is nowhere near done. There are many ways of writing comics. Some are more cinematic than others. Some writers lay out extensive details in their scripts so that every snowflake, every facial tick is laid out on every page that is going to be illustrated. I don't do that. In some ways, a comic script is a start. It's the first step, the very basic storyline, and the first sense of the characters in the story. For me, a comic script is like a theater script, partly because I spent a lot of time working in theater. I write out acts and scenes, set out basic moments, but focus on the narration and dialogue, which is great for me because really and truly that's my favorite part, because like I said, I'm a spy and I like to hear people talk. The task of a comic book writer is in part to think of the characters in terms of what they say, words that cut and words that soothe. Most of the comics that I've worked on pretty solidly reflect my love of talking and not talking, because I love how people can say so much by what they avoid as much by what they avoid as by what they embrace in what they say. And that, you guys, is from Foucault, The History of Sexuality. because I'm in a university, I felt like I should drop that. I haven't read Equality, History, and Sexuality. You should totally read it. It totally changed my life. Although it's so weird at parties when you're like dropping that stuff and people are like, nobody wants to hear that at a party. Anyway, I think part of what endears me to writing comics is that the language is performative. Yeah, I'm throwing that in there too. And I think, really it's a way of constructing someone by what they say and showing people trying to make themselves be a certain person by what they say. Because, the most interesting part of any story really is the person we want to be and the person we need to be and the person we are as a result of those things. The first person you're writing for when you're writing comics is your illustrator, who is the person who has to agree to tell that story with you. People always ask me, if they're writers, how to find an illustrator to work with. And I have no idea because I'm related to the first person that I did a comic book with. But really it really has to be something that someone else, it's like a marriage, except maybe better, I don't know. More stressful certainly in some ways. In some ways your comic script is like a long letter to your illustrator. And it's funny because there's an overlap with academia that way, because really a comic script is like this thing that you slave over for 6 months and then you hand it over to 2 people, and those are the only 2 people who will ever read it. Much like your research paper. So, there you go, we get there. So recently a woman who was introducing me at a library event asked me, right before I went on stage by the way, who was more important in comics, the writer or the illustrator? Which, first of all, why would you ask something like that? I was eating grapes at the time and I nearly choked. I've been in therapy now, so I can say that I'm important anyway. But I don't think that that's what she was asking me. I wondered if she had an idea of who she thought was more important, and she was trying to get me to confirm her suspicions. I also wondered if she thought I would say writer, because I'm a writer. The thing is, I think there is a general misconception of comics that places the words and the pictures side by side. It poses a comic as something that someone writes, which is then illustrated, as a comic that is something that has a writer and an illustrator, which technically it does, but it's not a one-to-one. A writer doesn't write apple so that an illustrator can draw apple. A writer writes a scene, and an illustrator's huge task is to take that scene and create it on the page using the narration and the dialogue the illustrator writes. So it's really a matter of using what the writer writes as opposed to drawing what's written, in part. It's actually a really strangely difficult thing. Sorry, I've had like 1 coffee today. It's a strangely difficult thing to come up with terminology that fits this process. For the longest time, Jillian and I have used the phrase co-created, which sounds weird. It's a terrible word because it has the word co in it, which just sounds awful. But it really is hard to find a word for a story that is written by 2 people. And I think it should be a pretty great word, because to me it's a pretty great thing to think that more than one person can tell a story together. Not that we do it in the same room holding hands or anything. And in fact, I think a little distance between you and your illustrator is often helpful. But it's a story that really, the thing that makes me the proudest of this one summer is that it is a story that encompasses 2 persons' ideas and perspectives. Not to get really sentimental, but I think that's pretty amazing. Poignant. Since my first comic, I've worked in various mediums. I'm still working in theater, although I feel too tired for performance art most of the time these days. I've made films and worked in prose, which takes a lot more time than writing comics. Although, I'm curiously not as much time as it takes to illustrate comics, so there you go. Comics is definitely one of my favorite ways to tell a story now. It is a medium, I think, which is particularly ideal for talking about teenagers. Because comics for me are fertile ground for exploring my favorite part of life in general, but especially of teenage life, and forgive me if I'm talking about you and you don't think this is true. But to me, the essence of being a teenager is contradiction. You are almost an adult with the expectation that you are getting ready to take on the responsibilities of being an adult, but you're not an adult. In some cases, as in the case of this one summer, you're a kid with few of the privileges and freedoms that go with this so-called adulthood that's coming your way. Being a teenager is about seeing this contradiction in the world around you, sometimes for the first time. which is why almost all shows about teenagers involve this revealing, awkward moment where something terrible happens and the teenager in question has to have this moment right to the camera of like, what? Do you mean life is unfair? It is. People say one thing and they clearly mean another. The world seems one way, seems like it should be one way, and more than often it's not. That, in my opinion, is why teenagers are so legitimately pissed off all the time. Comics have a great way of showing the world and the people in it as being two ways at once. The narration is one thread of the story, the landscape below is another. The character says one thing, their face, their body, their posture says another. You see one part of the story, hear another. Saying happy things and showing sad because I'm Canadian is one of my favorites. As a feminist, former performance artist, Canadian, and writer of YA, I have consistently had very little expectation of what constitutes YA, young adult books, or stories for YA audiences. My aspirations has always been to talk about teenagers and kids and describe them in a way that makes sense and feels real to me. Probably related to that, there are some things that take place in the books that I have worked on, including this one summer, that many people have deemed inappropriate and possibly upsetting for younger readers, possibly dangerous for younger readers. So as part of that, I'm going to end here with a little thing I wrote for Reading Rainbow, which is super cute, because Reading Rainbow still exists, you guys, about how I personally have dealt with some of the responses to this one summer. I am sitting in a van speeding along a highway in Texas, a cheerful librarian at the wheel. I am in town for one of many teen book festivals I will attend that year. It has occurred to me since I got into this vehicle that I should read the invitations I receive more carefully. Not that I didn't read this invitation, I guess I just didn't take it seriously, and I should have. Because when a librarian sends you an email saying they want to use your trip from the airport to the hotel as a chance to try out a 40-mile-per-hour author visit with 6 ninth graders, they totally mean it. Librarians, among their many fine qualities, are determined and inventive. I'm hoping this librarian also knows where to get a cup of coffee stat. The 6 ninth graders in question are all boys, which possibly because I went to an all-girls private school in Toronto, Canada, is totally terrifying to me. While munching on snacks, the boys talk animatedly. Mostly they tell me about Texas and how Texas is the best. Nobody here has told me that Pennsylvania is the best, by the way, but I hear it when I go to Texas. At some point, the librarian in charge says, hey, ask her something about the book, guys. The book in question, the reason for my visit to the Teen Book Festival, is my most recent comic collaboration with my cousin Jillian Tamaki, This One Summer. This One Summer is the story of 2 girls at a cottage in northern Ontario. It has been described as a coming-of-age story. In my experience promoting This One Summer, I've noticed that while adults generally have lovely things to say, kids prefer to tell you specifics, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they didn't get. The boys in the van tell me they like the drawings, they like the dud, who is one of the 2 male adolescent characters in the book. They are not interested in the 2 main characters, Rose and Wendy. They were annoyed about the fact that the dud's girlfriend cheated on him. I assert that the dud's girlfriend did not necessarily cheat on him. At least it is impossible to know whether or not she did from what you can see in the book. I attempt to steer the conversation towards a discussion of seeing something versus knowing something. The 6th, 9th graders do not seem interested in my thoughts on the subject. They know what they know. At some point, I hear snickering in the back. I turn and see that the boys have flipped to a page in the comic where Rose and Wendy discuss the existence of a certain sexual act. I'm curious to see if they will turn this into a question. One of the boys points to the page and asks me to explain what the 2 characters are talking about. I ask him to clarify what he is referring to. Suddenly the van is full of 9th graders who cannot look me in the eye. A few of them start to laugh nervously. This One Summer has themes, elements in the story that are adult in nature because in addition to younger characters, there are adult characters in the books, parents, other people who live in the area around the cottage, dealing with adult things like divorce, pregnancy, and miscarriage. Some kids seem indifferent or at least unaffected by the more mature themes of the book. A few kids I've met have appeared to be more interested in the fact that the book doesn't have an ending. I think it does. That's just me. Some kids are embarrassed. Some kids tell me it's inappropriate for the younger characters to talk about stuff like sex and their bodies. Many kids have told me that the characters talk about their boobs too much. I think that's subjective, obviously. I tell them that the way the kids talk and what they talk about in the book is how and what I remember kids talking about when I was a kid, but every kid is different and that's okay. I tell them that as far as I know, and I'm not that old, so I could be wrong, life involves confronting and dealing with this stuff, things like first kisses, fighting parents, hormonal teenagers, hormones in general. The book is a safe place to encounter these things, to meet people who seem weird because they're different or because they say things that make you, the reader, uncomfortable. A book is a safe place to encounter even really intense things like war and death. Because the best part of a book is if something feels not so safe or too weird or makes you uncomfortable, you can close the book and stop reading. The kids in the van on this particular afternoon are clearly too embarrassed to talk about whatever adult thing it is that's making them giggle. Or at least they're too embarrassed to ask me about it, just pointing. This is fine by me. As an author on a 40-mile-per-hour author visit, I feel it's my duty to move the subject along. I talk about how much books inspired me as a kid, not just the content of what I was reading, but more as I got older, the way my favorite writers told the story. I ask them what their favorite books are. We talk about the fact that I apparently need to read way more books because I haven't read any of their favorites. The kids in the van have done their part to ask the author questions about the book and listen to what the author has to say about books in general, so pretty soon we move on to other topics. I ask them what they would want to be if they could be a character in a zombie movie. One boy tells me he would like to be the best friend of the military guy who has all the weapons to wipe out the zombies. I think that this is an awesome answer, and I tell him so. So I just thought I would also give you guys a little bit of a sort of overview of comics and the work that I've done with Jillian. So this is the first comic that Jillian and I ever did. This is the original version of Skim, which in terms of how to get published, nowadays if you wanted to publish a comic, you would just open a Tumblr and you would put it there. But I'm from the 90s, so it was harder. And so we were very lucky, and we met this woman, Emily Powery, who was publishing mini comics, and she was looking for female writers and illustrators to kind of give them a chance to work in comics, which obviously has worked out really well. So this is the original mini comic of Skim, so we didn't really think of this as a YA novel when we first wrote it, which you can tell because the original text on the cover says, "This is the Diary of Skim Dakota, so fuck off." And when we sold it to a YA publisher, they requested that we take that text off the cover, and we obliged. So this is what happened. I can move. Can you guys hear me if I step away? Is the camera crew going to be like, oh no? Okay, so this is what happened when it became Groundwood published graphic novel. And this was our first publishing a graphic novel. So we actually wrote words by and pictures by, which we also did because we thought, who's going to know who's who? We both have the same last name. And that was something that we don't do anymore because we don't tend to think of it that way. Also, the question we get asked most is if we're sisters, which we're not, we're cousins. I always want people to ask us if we're married. Nobody ever asked me. So Skim was the story of this girl who is at the school where the boyfriend of a very popular girl tries to kill himself or kills himself. And this is the Girls Celebrate Life Club, which starts up sort of Dead Poet Society-esque. This is some other stuff from Skim. This was sort of the beginning of me realizing how you can do contradiction in comics. Like this slide here, where you have this really kind of placid scene where she's sitting in this living room and the text says, "It hurts to breathe." So you could have this interior monologue where the character is totally freaking out, and yet what you see is stillness. This is some more stuff. I can't take credit for any of this because this is all Jillian, so really this is just where we all admire how awesome Jillian is. So this is, so Skim was set in the 90s because I am kind of wary of writing about teenagers today because of social media. So I feel like that's sort of this extra hiccup in how to write about a teenager's lives, or live them. I don't know how you guys are doing it.
So we, as part of that, we were sort of looking for some cool 90s hair to put on the characters. So these are Jillian's sketches of various 90s hair. You can see there's a lot of like up bang, which some people still rock, and that's okay. This is actually my favorite page from Skim, because I used to do this when I was really upset all the time, and I would write out these angry messages and stuff to save them. So I wonder if people read Skim and then thought like, oh my gosh, I wonder if that's who that was who was drawing out those things against the kids. So this is the second comic we did this one summer, which we wanted to set in this. So the inspiration for this one summer was a couple things. One was that I really wanted to do a comic that was set in cottage country, because to me, going to the cottage was like this Fox and the Hound thing. It was like this really kind of bubble-like place where you go to the cottage, you're separate from everybody else. Time is completely different at the cottage. It's like, it goes by really fast, and yet you spend your whole time as a kid freaking out because time is going so slowly at the cottage because there's nothing to do but watch the news and make sandcastles. So I thought it would be a really great setting. Jillian had never been to the cottage, so we did a road trip together. So I wrote the script, and then we decided to go to Muskoka. And this is actually from St. Marie Among the Hurons, which is prominently featured in the comic book. St. Marie Among the Hurons is hilarious. It's like a theme park that celebrates this relationship between the Friends and the Hurons. And it's like got all these people in like period costumes, but they're not Hurons, you know? Like, it's weird. And actually, when I was a kid, I didn't really know what to make of this. Like, I didn't really understand the whole idea of like dressing up as something that you weren't. So when someone would tell me that they were like, like a medicine man or something, I would be like, amazing. It never occurred to me that it was like a graduate student dressed up in. So we went to St. Marie Among the Hurons. This is Jillian taking pictures of all the sort of cottagey-ness. So this is actually where I went to the cottage when I was a kid for the longest time. And it's super amazing whenever you go on a road trip with an illustrator, the things that they take pictures of are not like tourist pictures. Like, not a lot of tourists take pictures of like garbage and like signage, but you can see like this stuff all totally ended up in the comic book later. And then we went to Muskoka just because Muskoka is amazing. So that's me with these two mini pinchers that we went with, walking along the beach in Muskoka. So two of the sort of main things were, we really wanted to get the sense of like, because the cottage is like this place of the town, people who live there, and the tourists, right? Like it's this very, economy that happens in a lot of places of like, the people who are just there who have money, and the people who live there and don't have money, and the people who just visit and do. And the sort of center, like intersection of that is always the local corner store, which is, some people's local corner store, or it's like the cottage corner store. And when I was a kid, I remember the first time I realized that people lived at the cottage was when I realized that the guy who worked there, like lived there. Like the guy who worked at the corner store, like lived there. And I remember asking him, like, no? And the cottage corner store is amazing because it is the least stocked corner store of any corner store. They have like 2 things of Wonder Bread and Tide and some really old gummies. Like, I love a corner store where the candy is dusty. It's never been picked up. Like, nobody ever eats Mars bars, so the Mars bars are like hard as rocks. That's my bread and butter. And then that's obviously Jillian taking more pictures of garbage for reference. So I give Jillian a script. It looks like this. I tend to write in acts and scenes. Mostly it really does look like a theater script because it's really just sort of a script that sets up the scene, and then mostly it's dialogue and narration. For this particular comic, it was way less narration, which I think worked really well. Because we really wanted to have that sense of nostalgia, but really be in this moment, which it's hard to be in a moment when you're narrating. So Jillian starts doing her little sketches, and then eventually she makes what is, to me, the coolest thing, which is like this pencil mock-up of what the book is going to look like. And all this process happens when I'm far away, and I only know what's happening when I see it on Instagram or something. Like, it's very distant from me. And then I knew it was going to be really big when I saw that. That's when I realized that I'd written a really long book. And then she starts, it's like various versions of what this mock-up is going to look like. Then we go through an editing process, and a lot of the editing process is a conversation between Jillian and I where we figure out what's working and what's not working in the script, which is really hard to tell until you have the visuals with it. Because up until then, it's this very theoretical exercise. One of the things that got cut out, for example, is I had originally had this dream sequence, which I had basically inserted in order to have the ending make sense. And then as soon as we saw everything laid out, it was very clear that dream sequences are super cheesy. So we cut them out. But actually, Jillian is probably is an amazing editor. So then she goes away and for a very long time basically maps out everything. And this is what it looks like. This is obviously not the final version, but so I can't remember the name of the program she uses, and you can probably tweet her and ask her if you're super curious. I think it's like a manga program for like laying out pages for that, but anyway, that's what it looks like when it's on pages. That's still editing. And then she starts moving into something closer to the final art. And starts shading. And starts looking more and more amazing. The famous turkey jerky is actually a story that one of the stories that inspired this is when I went to the cottage when I was a kid, there was a turkey hatchery on our way to the cottage. And whenever we drove by it, my dad would say, "That's where your brother was born." So that ended up in the comic, which, as I was telling the story today, as we were driving over, I thought, my poor brother, like the turkey will never die. And one of the things we decided to do for the comic was to print it in color. So it's actually one color that ends up creating all these different shades. And that's pretty much it. That's the last page from Skim, or a page from Skim. So that's pretty much it, you guys. So I will answer any questions that you have, which is maybe not that much of like a gimme, like maybe that's not super exciting to you, unless you have a burning question and then maybe it's super exciting. I don't know. But anything. Yeah.
Super happy to hear you mention Harry the Spy, because that was my favorite book going up, and it made me think, what are some of the other books or writers that have kind of helped shape you as a writer?
I'm glad you asked, now that I'm standing in America, so awkward saying this. So when I was a teenager, I was super into this idea that Canadian literature was the best, and I would read it all. So I refused to read American literature. And I basically went on this binge of Margaret Lawrence, Alice Munro, Timothy Finley, Margaret Atwood. I still think Cat's Eye is probably the best book written about kids ever written. I think it's stunning. Yeah, Margaret Atwood forever. So I really was influenced by that. And I think definitely my thoughts about character and time and I mean, I write a lot of disgruntled women, and I think that comes from a long history of reading Canadian literature. That said, today I'm absolutely inspired by, I'm a huge Lori Moore fan, and I fall asleep every night to the New Yorker fiction podcast, so that's like my bread and butter now. And I really I'm super into the comics that are coming out now. I think that now is the best time. You guys are so lucky. Whatever. Like, you guys can grow up with the Lumberjanes, and Ramona, and Ms. Marvel, and all of these amazing comic books. Bombshells, which is another one that's coming out now. It's just an incredible time to love graphic novels. So I actually came up here with 5, and I'm making my way through them now. Including Squirrel Girl, I'm also reading that. Because my friend is dressing up as Squirrel Girl for Halloween, and I'm just trying to stay current. So yeah, that's my influences, for sure. Ooh. hear you if you shout from the.
We're not supposed to.
Oh.
So this was a great talk. Thank
thank
you so
you.
much. And I wanted to ask you about something, the connection between performativity, performance art,
Right.
and comics. And the reason I'm asking it is because the graphic medicine conference that's going on in Canada, I mean, not in Canada, sorry, in Dundee, Scotland this summer has as its theme performance and comics.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think I'm a butler person, obviously. So I'm really I can never pull out these names, you guys. I mean, when I talk to high school classes, they don't know what I'm talking about. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm really into this idea of how language is the sort of doing of a person, that you are really sort of making yourself known. You're using all these resources and pulling all these resources together to be the person you are in the public world. And I actually think that teenagers are like drag queens, because it is this time in your life when you're really choosing how to be. And I think that the great part of comics is it's really a way of showing that, like really showing this combination of the physicality of a character and what they say. Like Rose, there's this scene where they're talking, where they have their feminist argument in the water, and Rose is kind of putting on this like sophisticated adult air. She's sort of dressing down Wendy about, you know, about who's a slut and how Wendy basically doesn't understand who a slut is, which none of us really understand. And I love that idea that you can have this kid who's trying on being an adult, who's trying on her version of all these things that she's put together as being an adult. And I think that the great thing about comics is that you're not stuck in one person's perspective. You're really not, you know, you're not in anybody's head. You're able to sort of watch this thing as like a third party. And it really lets you kind of leave that bare without having to explain what's happening in a scene. Like I think writing that scene and writing that out, like writing a character's misconceptions about what they're doing in any given moment is very difficult. You know, I mean, it's funny because you're like, I'm talking about these people in this really sort of snotty way, like they don't know what they're doing, but they're fictional, so it's okay. But yeah, I'm really fascinated by that. And actually, right before I wrote my first comic, I had just come off of doing this whole piece on drag queens and teenagers and code switching, which is when people take on accents and stuff. So I went right from that into writing comics, and I think that that is definitely a huge influence on the stuff that I do today. All comic people are nerds, and every comic person has their own specific nerd. So it's like some comic people are like Canadian history, and some comic people are Star Wars, and everyone has their own pocket, and mine is definitely like women's studies, you know, that whole thing, which makes me, like I said, super fun at parties, obviously. Yeah. I mean, imagine if you guys all go and read Butler as a result of this. That would be so great.
I'm actually a comic artist, and I actually just got into our local paper like last week.
Congratulations.
And I've been trying to get actually published for a comic I've tossed around in my head for like years. And I've been wondering how hard is it to actually get published for a full-scale like comic?
Super hard. So here's the thing. I think that the thing that you need to do is produce as much work as possible. And I am really lucky in that I think I grew up as a person who was just trying to do work and trying to find places to put it. So before I wrote graphic novels, or started working on graphic novels, I did a ton of work of like doing essays and getting them published places. I wrote zines because this was before blogs. So now I do have a blog. Back then I was like photocopying things and like stapling them together and selling them for $1. But I think the key is to accumulate a ton of work. Because one of the things that a publisher wants in addition to your genius comics is to know that you are going to be able to complete the job of writing a whole graphic novel. Because it is a massive undertaking. Like it is, like, you know, I will hand off a script to Jillian and then it's years before it's done. And to maintain, it's like, you know, imagine a relationship that lasts 3 years. Like, you know, your first relationship, you're like, a year and you're like, oh, we've been together a year, that's amazing. Like, there's 2 more years after that that you have to endure the same person. And you have to endure that person even when they're not making any sense to you, even when you don't like the things that they have to say, like all of this stuff. It is an incredible endurance project, writing a graphic novel or creating a graphic novel. So the more that a publisher can see that you have put in the equivalent of that amount of work, the better they feel about, publishing you. I mean, nowadays, I think, like, if you look at Kate Beaton's career, she published Harker Vagrant online for ages. She self-published, she did all this stuff herself. She got a huge audience, which is what publishers know that you want. They want to know that you have that. So I think that really the main thing is to create your bulk of work, get your audience, and then worry about, like, the publisher is like the last step, really. And know all the publishers that are out there. Like, know who you really like. Although For a Second is the best, obviously.
We're just about out of time, actually, so I'm going to ask one last question, because because I can. But there's also 3 things I wanted to bring up about your book winning the award this year. So number 1 is you and Jillian are the first women to ever win the Lynd Graphic Novel Prize, which is awesome. And not only first women, first Canadians. Thank you to Scott Smith, who serves on our advisory board, who encouraged us to open the award to Canadian submissions several years ago. So.
On behalf of Canada, I say thank you.
There you go. Yay. And also, your graphic novel was the first graphic novel that has ever been selected as a Caldecott Honor book, which, if anyone in the room is not familiar with Caldecott Honor, it is for the best picture books.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
Published in a given year and selected by the American Library Association. So final question, I was wondering if you could give us a snapshot of, and then we'll break for signing and book sale, but what was it like as a graphic novelist to win a picture book award?
Well, I think it's been sort of like this massive recognition, which has been really amazing. So there's 2 things. One is it's amazing, and who doesn't want a phone call where someone's told you won something? It's so great. Although I thought they were T-Mobile when they called. Because they were like, it was an unknown number, and they were like, is this Mariko Tamaki? And I was like, I don't know. You tell me. And it's incredible, and I think the thing is that, it puts you in this group of people that I obviously totally admire and respect. And I mean, the best part of it is that I get to spend so much time with librarians now. Like, librarians are my crew now, which I totally appreciate. And then the other thing is that you really, like, my main goal is to focus on my work. And so there's this amazing part of it, and then there's this part where you're like, and now I have to write another book. So it's been really great, and it's been a really wild summer. I mean, for a really wild summer, and now I'm just trying to, like, move on and write the next thing. So yes, it's been really great. And thank you guys for having me.
Thanks to each and every one of you for coming today. Thanks to Mariko for an awesome presentation, and please join us for a signing and for a book sale afterwards.
Go back to class, study hard.